I can't let you die. Mara's voice cracked, thick with desperation, as she clutched the last loaf she'd baked from her dwindling wheat, flour dusting her shaking hands. A groan drew her outside where Tayanita, a young Lakota warrior, lay crumpled by her cabin, his furs in tatters, blood oozing from deep gashes, his sunken eyes barely flickering as he choked out that blue-coated soldiers had burned his village to ash. Her gut twisted. Sharing her bread and hiding him in her cellar could brand her a traitor to Cutter's brutal grip. Yet she chose mercy, hauling his broken body beneath the floorboards, only for night to bring blazing torches and the heavy tread of Cutter's men, closing in like wolves. What had her kindness unleashed? Mara lived alone on the edge of Black Elk Ridge, a widow at 30, her hands calloused from clawing a living from a barren plot. Her husband, Thomas, died 3 winters back, gunned down in a settler's land grab, leaving her a rotting cabin and a vow to guard his earth. The townsfolk scorned her, branding her foolish for defying Cutter, the brutal landowner whose military cronies ruled the region. Hunger gnawed her bones, frost choked her crops, and loneliness hollowed her heart. But Mara held fast to Thomas's memory and her stubborn kindness, a flicker of light in a world that crushed it. Mara stirred awake in her creaking cabin, the chill seeping through warped boards, her breath fogging in the dim light that leaked past the frost-crusted window. She swung her legs off the cot, the cold floor biting her bare feet, and shuffled to a burlap sack in the corner. Her fingers, rough and cracked, scooped out the last handful of wheat, each grain a precious relic of a failed harvest. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache that had become her constant companion. She tipped the wheat onto the table, her hands trembling not just from cold, but from the weight of knowing this was all she had left. At the hearth, she fed the dying fire with a splintered chair leg, the crackle of flames a fleeting comfort. Kneading dough, sweat beaded on her brow despite the chill, her arms straining as she pressed and folded, willing the meager flour to stretch. The scent of baking bread rose, warm and fleeting, but it couldn't mask the dread gnawing at her. She sliced the loaf, steam curling up, and stared at its small, dense form. Outside, her field lay barren, stalks brittle under a gray sky, whispering of a winter she might not survive. Mara's eyes stung as she muttered, "Stay strong," like Thomas wanted. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her. Hunger twisted her insides, but she wrapped the loaf in cloth, resolving to ration it. She wouldn't break, not yet. The memory of her husband's voice, steady and sure, anchored her against the looming cold. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping, cut through the quiet, jerking Mara from her thoughts as she sat by the hearth, the bread's warmth fading in her hands. Her knife clattered to the table, her pulse quickening as she rose, heart thumping against her ribs. She crept to the window, peering through a splintered crack, but the night outside was a wall of black, broken only by the wind's low howl across the empty field. Her fingers curled around the knife's worn handle, its weight familiar from nights spent fending off settlers who'd come to scare her off her land. Another sound came, softer, a moan like a wounded animal, faint but piercing. Mara's breath caught, her mind racing. Could it be a trap, some trick by Cutter's men? She edged to the door, her palm slick against the knife, and cracked it open. Cold air rushed in, stinging her face as she squinted into the shadows. The field was still, but the moan came again, human and raw, pulling at her gut. She whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible, and stepped onto the porch, the frost biting her bare feet. Her eyes darted across the darkness, knife raised, every muscle taut. Moonlight broke through the clouds, casting a pale glow, and there, against a gnarled tree, a figure slumped, motionless. Mara froze, her breath clouding in the air, torn between fear and the urge to help, knowing danger waited in the dark. Mara's boots crunched on frozen grass as she approached the tree, her knife glinting in the moonlight, her heart hammering so loud she feared it would betray her. The figure was Tayanita, a young Lakota warrior, his body a broken heap, furs ripped to ribbons, blood pooling beneath him, staining the snow red. His face was ashen, cheekbones sharp under gaunt skin, his eyes sunken and flickering with fading life. She gasped, recognizing the Lakota markings on his torn sleeve, knowing the army hunted his kind without mercy. Kneeling, Mara touched his shoulder, her hands instantly slick with warm blood from gashes that carved his chest. Tayanita's lips moved, a faint mumble escaping, "Help, soldiers! Burned everything!" His voice was a thread, snapping Mara's fear into focus. She glanced back at her cabin, the dark field beyond, half expecting Cutter's men to emerge. The risk slammed into her. Hiding him could bring death, a traitor's noose. Yet she couldn't turn away. She gripped his arms, ignoring the pain in her own hands, and hauled him toward the cabin, his weight dragging her down. Blood smeared her dress as she stumbled, her breath ragged. Inside, she kicked open the cellar trap door, the hinges screeching, and eased him down, his groans echoing in the dark. She covered the hatch, her hand shaking, knowing soldiers could come any moment. Mara leaned against the wall, chest heaving, her choice made, her fate now tied to the dying warrior below. The hearth's faint glow flickered over Tayanita's bloodied form as he lay on a worn blanket, his shallow breaths rattling in the quiet cabin. A tin bowl clinked as water sloshed from a cracked jug, and a damp rag turned crimson as it wiped the gashes carving his chest. The air grew heavy with a metallic tang of blood, mingling with the fading scent of bread. Tayanita's voice broke through, weak and jagged. "Blue coats came at dawn. Fire ate the lodges. My sister burned." His hollow eyes stared at the ceiling, lost in the horror. Mara's hands stilled, her chest tightening as Thomas's face flashed before her, his body falling in a settler's ambush 3 years ago. She pressed the rag harder, swallowing a sob as Tayanita trembled, his whisper barely audible. "They spoke of gold, a mine, then torched it all." The word gold hit like a stone, her mind racing to Cutter's greed. She lifted a cup to his lips, steadying his shaking jaw, but her gaze flicked to the door, fear coiling in her stomach. Helping him could draw the army's wrath, a death sentence. Yet his grief echoed hers, binding their pain. She squeezed his hand, her jaw set, even as the wind outside carried the faint sound of boots. Wiping her hands, she stood, heart pounding, knowing she'd stepped into a fight she couldn't escape. Fear coiled in the cabin's dim light, where the half-loaf of bread sat on the table, its crust a stark reminder of starvation's grip. Shadows swayed on the walls as thoughts of Cutter's cold smirk and iron hold over the region flooded in. Hiding Tayanita could summon soldiers, their accusations of treason stripping away Thomas's land. The window framed the barren field, its frozen earth a sacred tie to her husband's memory. Hands trembling, the urge to drag Tayanita outside surged, a desperate bid to save herself. But his ragged breaths, each one a fragile thread, tugged at her soul, demanding she act. Thomas's voice echoed in her mind. "Kindness is our strength." Fingers dug into the table's edge, nails scraping wood, as terror clashed with duty. The weight of the choice pressed down, cold as the frost beyond the door. A deep breath steadied her, defiance flaring in her chest. She wouldn't let fear rule, not when a man's life hung in the balance. Grabbing the knife, she straightened, her resolve hardening like the icy ground. She'd shield Tayanita, whatever the cost, her heart beating with a stubborn spark that refused to fade. The cabin's silence felt like a held breath, bracing for the storm she knew was coming. The knife's blade glinted as it cut through the loaf, releasing a warm, yeasty scent that filled the cabin, coaxing Tayanita's eyelids to flutter open. Kneeling beside him, a piece of bread was broken off, hands steady despite the dread knotting the chest. Tayanita's gaunt fingers shook, grasping the morsel, his cracked lips parting as he chewed slowly, each bite seeming to pull him from death's shadow. His eyes, wet with gratitude, met hers. No longer just a warrior, but a man shattered by loss, his pain raw and open. The fire's soft crackle warmed the air, and Thomas's shadow seemed to linger, his approval a quiet strength. Tayanita's whisper, hoarse and faint, carried weight. "Thank you. I won't forget." The words struck deep, weaving a thread between strangers, their survival now entwined. A faint smile curved her lips, but eyes darted to the cellar hatch, pulse racing at the thought of soldiers prying it open. The bread, the last shield against hunger, was his now, a choice that could end her. A hand rested on his shoulder, lingering with quiet resolve, then rose, heart heavy with the peril ahead. The wind howled outside, laced with distant dog barks, a chilling omen. The knife was gripped tighter, fear drowned by a fierce vow. Life had been given, and both would be fought for, no matter what came. The distant bark of dogs sliced through the cabin's quiet, sending a jolt of panic through Mara's chest as she stood over the cellar hatch. Her fingers fumbled with the iron ring, yanking open the trap door, dust swirling in the firelight. Tayanita groaned, his bloodied form heavy as she gripped his arms, half dragging him down the creaking steps. His wounds reopened, staining her hands red, each of his pained gasps tightening the knot in her stomach. She shoved a tattered blanket over him, whispering, "Stay quiet, no matter what." The hatch slammed shut, and she slid an old rug over it, kicking dirt to mask the edges. Her heart pounded, a deafening drum, as she grabbed a broom, pretending to sweep, though her eyes kept darting to the door. The barking grew louder, joined by the crunch of boots on frost. Mara's breath hitched, the weight of her choice crashing down. Hiding Tayanita could cost her life, her land, everything Thomas died for. She clutched the broom tighter, nails digging into the wood, forcing her face into a mask of calm. If Cutter's men found the hatch, there'd be no mercy. She glanced at the loaf on the table, its warmth now a cruel irony. The cabin felt smaller, walls closing in. As she braced for the fight she couldn't avoid, her resolve a fragile shield against the terror threatening to break her. Hooves thundered outside, their rhythm shaking the cabin's thin walls, as Mara pressed her face to a crack in the door, her breath fogging the wood. Torches blazed in the night, casting jagged shadows, and Cutter's tall figure loomed at the head of a dozen soldiers, their rifles glinting under the stars. His voice, cold and sharp, barked orders to search the area, each word a blade against Mara's nerves. Her hands gripped the table's edge, knuckles white, as she forced herself to stand still, though fear churned like a storm inside. The fire's dim glow flickered, barely holding back the darkness, as she smoothed her apron, trying to look unbothered. A sharp knock rattled the door, and she opened it, the torchlight searing her eyes. Cutter's gaze pierced her, his scarred face unreadable, like a predator sizing up prey. "Evening, Mara," he said, his tone mocking as soldiers fanned out, their boots trampling her field. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and nodded, praying the rug hid the hatch's outline. The soldiers' shouts echoed, dogs snarling closer, and Mara's pulse raced, each sound a threat to Tayanita's silence below. She steadied her breathing, forcing a blank expression, knowing one wrong move could end them both. Her fingers twitched, itching for the knife on the table, but she stood firm, defiance burning beneath her fear. Cutter's boots thudded on the porch, his shadow swallowing the doorway as he leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. "We're hunting Lakota scum," he growled, his voice dripping with authority, eyes boring into Mara's. "Seen any?" She shook her head, her voice a whisper. "Just me here." Her hands clenched behind her back, nails biting her palms, as she fought to keep her gaze steady. Neighbors huddled in the distance, their silhouettes frozen, too scared to speak. Cutter's lips curled into a cold smile, like he could smell her fear. He raised a hand, and soldiers spread out, kicking through her barren field, their lanterns casting eerie glows. Mara's heart lurched with every step, her mind screaming for Tayanita to stay silent in the cellar. A soldier's boot scuffed near the cabin, too close to the hidden hatch, and she bit her lip, tasting blood, to keep from gasping. "You're a stubborn one, Mara," Cutter said, stepping closer, his bulk blocking the firelight. "But even stubborn fools slip up." She forced a nod, her stomach twisting as she pictured the noose for traitors. The dogs barked louder, sniffing the ground, and Mara prayed the rug's dust masked Tayanita's scent. She shifted slightly, blocking the soldier's path to the hearth, her defiance a quiet fire. Cutter's eyes narrowed, but he turned, barking at his men to move on, leaving Mara trembling, her fate hanging by a thread. The cabin door creaked as a young soldier stepped inside, his boots scuffing the floor, a sharp spear clutched in his gloved hand. His eyes, narrow and suspicious, swept over the sparse room, lingering on the hearth's dying glow. Mara's heart slammed against her ribs, but she forced a tight smile, gesturing to a wobbly chair. "Sit, I'll get water," she said, her voice steady, despite the sweat prickling her neck. She moved to the jug, her back to him, every step calculated to draw his gaze from the rug covering the cellar hatch. The soldier pointed at a smear of mud near the door, his voice gruff. "What's this?" Mara's throat tightened, but she shrugged, saying, "My boots, from fetching wood this morning." His boots thudded closer to the hatch, each step a hammer on her nerves, her pulse roaring as she pictured Tayanita below, bleeding and silent. Thinking fast, she turned, her voice soft. "My husband used to hunt here, before the settlers got him." The soldier paused, his spear lowering slightly, his face softening for a moment. Mara held her breath, her fingers twitching toward the knife on the table. He studied her, then grunted, turning to leave, his spear scraping the wall. She exhaled, legs trembling, as he stepped outside to report to Cutter, her quick thinking buying a fragile reprieve, but the danger still loomed like a storm. Relief flooded through as Cutter's voice barked outside, sharp and final. "Nothing here. Move on." The young soldier trudged out, his parting glance at Mara laced with doubt, his spear glinting under the torchlight. She slammed the door shut, leaning against it, her breath coming in gasps, her body shaking as if the cold had seeped into her bones. Her hands fumbled with the cellar hatch, the rug sliding away to reveal the trap door. Lifting it, she found Tayanita curled below, his face slick with sweat, his chest heaving but silent. "You saved me again," he whispered, his voice raw, eyes shining with gratitude. Mara nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and helped him sit against the wall, checking his wounds in the dim light. She bolted the door, her fingers trembling, and peered through a crack, ensuring the soldiers' torches faded into the night. The cabin's silence pressed against her, heavy with the truth. This was only a pause, not safety. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, the knife still in her lap. Tayanita's breathing steadied, but Mara's mind raced, replaying the soldier's steps, the near discovery. Her choice to hide him had pulled her into a deadly game, and Cutter's suspicion would only grow. She gripped the knife tighter, her fear battling a stubborn resolve to protect the man whose life now depended on her cunning. Morning light crept through the cabin's cracked window, casting pale streaks across Tayanita's bandaged form as he rested on the blanket. A tin cup of water trembled in Mara's hands as she knelt beside him, dabbing his fevered brow with a damp cloth. His strength flickered back, a faint color returning to his ashen face, and he met her gaze with a nod, his eyes clear with trust. From his torn furs, he pulled a crumpled scrap of paper, its edges stained with blood, and pressed it into her hand. The paper bore a military seal, its scrawled words jagged as if written in haste. "Took it from a dead soldier," Tayanita rasped, his voice strained. "They burned my village, talked of gold and Cutter." Mara's fingers tightened around the paper, her stomach lurching as the name landed like a stone. She unfolded it, her eyes tracing the unfamiliar symbols, a cold dread rising as she realized this tied Cutter to the army's slaughter. Tayanita's hand gripped hers, weak but firm, his voice low. "They're hunting me for this." Her mind spun, the cabin's walls seeming to close in, the air thick with the weight of what she held. She tucked the paper into her apron, her resolve hardening despite the fear clawing at her. Helping Tayanita had already cost her safety, but this clue could unravel Cutter's plans. She stood, her heart pounding, knowing the fight was just beginning. The fire's embers glowed faintly, casting a dim light across the cabin as Mara sat hunched over the crumpled paper, its military seal stark against the blood-stained edges. Her fingers trembled, tracing the jagged script, each word a weight pressing on her chest. Memories of Cutter's visits flooded back, his hulking frame filling her doorway, his voice dripping with threats to seize her land. The army symbols on the paper hinted at a plot far beyond her small world, tying Cutter to something sinister. She turned to Tayanita, propped against the wall, his bandaged chest rising weakly. "Cutter runs this region," she said, her voice low, "and he's cruel enough to burn villages." Tayanita nodded, his eyes hardening, and rasped. "He ordered the fire." I heard his name. Her stomach churned, fear mixing with a spark of resolve. She couldn't ignore this, not with Thomas's land and Tayanita's life at stake. Eli, the town merchant, flashed in her mind, his quiet gossip about local dealings a possible lifeline. She folded the paper, tucking it close, her jaw set against the dread. The cabin's silence felt oppressive, the walls echoing her racing thoughts. She stood, her hands steadying, determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant stepping into Cutter's shadow. The fire flickered, a reminder of the fragile warmth she was fighting to protect, pushing her toward a dangerous path. Frost crunched under Mara's boots as she pulled on her worn coat, the cabin's chill biting her skin. She knelt by the cellar hatch, lifting it to check Tayanita, his pale face barely visible in the gloom. "Stay here. Keep quiet," she whispered, her voice firm despite the knot in her throat. He nodded, his hand brushing hers, a silent promise to fight if soldiers came. She slipped the blood-stained paper into her coat's lining, its weight a constant reminder of the risk. Glancing out at the barren field, Thomas's land stretched before her, a sacred trust she couldn't lose. Her heart pounded, urging her to stay safe, but the truth about Cutter demanded action. She stepped outside, the wind slicing through her, each gust feeling like a warning. The path to town stretched long and lonely, the distant hills shrouded in mist. Mara's breath clouded the air, her steps quickening as she pushed through fear, driven by the need to protect Tayanita and expose Cutter's crimes. Eli's shop was her only hope, his knowledge a slim chance to unravel the plot. She gripped her coat tighter, the paper crinkling against her chest, her resolve hardening with every step. The field faded behind her, but its pull anchored her, a silent vow to return and fight for what was hers, no matter the cost. Dust swirled around Mara's boots as she stepped into the bustling town, the clamor of carts and voices jarring after the cabin's silence. She wove through the crowd, her eyes fixed on Eli's shop, its weathered sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of wood and leather, and Eli, a stocky man with graying hair, greeted her with a warm nod. "Mara, been a while," he said, his smile fading as he saw her tense face. She leaned close, keeping her voice low, and asked about Cutter's dealings, careful not to mention Tayanita. Eli's brow furrowed, and he glanced at the door before answering. "Cutter's moving goods through the forest, big loads, guarded." He warned her to steer clear, noting Cutter's ties to the army. Mara's heart lifted, a glimmer of hope sparking, but fear lingered, knowing Cutter's reach could crush her. She thanked Eli, promising to return, and slipped out, her mind racing with plans to investigate the forest shipments. The paper in her coat felt heavier, its secrets urging her forward. She adjusted her scarf, hiding her nerves, and headed back, determined to check on Tayanita before plotting her next move. The town's noise faded, but Eli's warning echoed, a reminder of the danger she was stepping into, her courage a fragile flame against the gathering storm. A familiar voice called out as Mara navigated the crowded market, her steps slowing at the sight of Sarah, her old friend standing by a fruit stall. Sarah's thin frame and nervous eyes stood out, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. "Mara, you holding up?" she asked, her voice shaky, forcing a smile. Mara nodded, mentioning the tough winter but keeping Tayanita's existence locked tight, her instincts wary. Sarah's gaze darted around, and she leaned closer, whispering, "Heard of any strangers near your place?" The question hit like a cold wind, Mara's pulse quickening as she studied Sarah's tense face. "Just me out there," she replied, her tone flat, eyes narrowing. Sarah's lips quivered, and she hurried off, her shawl trailing in the dust, leaving Mara rooted, suspicion curling in her gut. The market's bustle felt suffocating, vendors' shouts blending with her racing thoughts. Had Sarah been talking to Cutter? Mara's hand brushed the hidden paper, its weight grounding her. She turned toward home, her pace quickening, the need to protect Tayanita overriding her fear. The town's edges blurred as she left, the road stretching lonely and gray, her mind churning with Sarah's odd behavior. She'd check the cellar first, then plan with Tayanita, her resolve sharpening like a blade, ready to face whatever Cutter's shadow held. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows as Mara trudged back to the cabin, her boots heavy with market dust. Eli's words about Cutter's forest shipments replayed in her head, each one a puzzle piece she couldn't yet fit. She slipped into the cabin, the air colder now, and lifted the cellar hatch, her breath catching as Tayanita looked up, his face still pale but alert. "You're back," he said, his voice stronger, a faint smile breaking through. She handed him water, her hand steady, and shared Eli's news, her voice low. "Cutter's moving something big, guarded by soldiers." Tayanita's eyes darkened, and he nodded, saying, "The gold. It's why they burned us." Mara's chest tightened, the paper in her coat burning against her skin. She sat beside him, the fire's glow fading, and weighed her options. Confronting Cutter was suicide, but staying silent could doom Tayanita. Sarah's nervous question at the market gnawed at her, a warning she couldn't ignore. She stood, pacing, her mind racing for a plan. The forest shipments were the key, but spying on them meant risking everything. Tayanita's hand touched hers, his grip weak but firm. "We'll fight together." Mara nodded, her fear battling a growing fire of defiance. She'd start with Eli again, dig deeper, and keep Tayanita hidden, her heart set on unraveling Cutter's plot, no matter the danger lurking beyond her door. Sarah's boots dragged through the dust as she reached her small house, the weight of dread pressing on her chest. Inside, Cutter waited, his bulk filling the doorway, his scarred face twisted in a smirk. "You're late," he growled, slamming a fist on the table, making her flinch. He leaned close, his voice low and menacing. "Watch Mara, or your boy loses this land." Sarah's eyes welled, her hands twisting her shawl, but she nodded, her throat too tight to speak, visions of her son's hungry face haunting her, memories of Mara's kindness, shared meals in better days, stabbed at her heart, but fear for her child drowned her guilt. She trudged to Mara's cabin, forcing a smile as she knocked, her eyes darting to the shadows for signs of Cutter's men. Mara opened the door, her face weary but warm, and Sarah stepped inside, her voice shaky as she asked about the harvest. Her gaze snagged on a smear of mud near the cellar hatch, too fresh to be Mara's, her pulse spiking with panic. She stammered, "Just checking on you," but her hands trembled, betraying her. Mara's eyes narrowed, sensing the lie, and Sarah hurried out, her breath ragged, knowing she'd betray her friend. At Cutter's camp, she whispered about the mud, tears falling as his cold laugh echoed, her heart breaking under the weight of her forced betrayal. Guilt gnawed at Sarah as she sat across from Mara in the cabin, the fire's dim light casting shadows on the walls. She forced chatter about crops, her voice thin and unsteady, while her eyes flicked to the floor, spotting a distinct boot print in the mud near the cellar hatch, unlike Mara's worn shoes. Her heart raced, the print a silent scream of danger, confirming Cutter's suspicions. "Anyone been by lately?" she asked, her voice cracking, hoping Mara would confess. Mara's face hardened, her reply sharp. "Just me, Sarah." The air grew thick, suspicion coiling between them, and Sarah's hand shook, clutching her shawl to hide her fear. She stood, mumbling about chores, and fled the cabin, her steps unsteady on the frozen ground. At Cutter's camp, his men loomed like wolves, their lanterns casting harsh light. Sarah's voice broke as she pointed to the boot print in her memory, whispering, "It's not hers." Cutter's laugh was a blade, his eyes glinting with triumph as he barked, "Search her place tonight." Sarah's knees buckled, her tears freezing on her cheeks, the betrayal searing her soul. She stumbled home, her mind replaying Mara's steady gaze, knowing she'd unleashed a storm on her friend, her fear for her son no comfort against the guilt that choked her. The wind howled outside Cutter's sprawling ranch as Mara stepped into his smoky office, the stench of tobacco clinging to the air. She squared her shoulders, her voice calm. "I'm thinking of selling the land." Cutter lounged behind a desk, his eyes sharp, a predator's glint beneath his oily smile. "Smart move," he said, but his tone dripped with mockery, his fingers drumming on a ledger. Mara leaned forward, feigning interest. "Heard you're shipping goods, maybe I could join in?" His smile faltered, and he waved off the question, saying, "Just supplies." But his grip tightened on the desk, betraying his urgency for her land. Her pulse quickened, sensing his secrets, but she pressed on, asking about the forest routes. Cutter's eyes narrowed, and he stood towering over her. "Seen any strangers, Mara?" Her stomach twisted, Tayanita's face flashing in her mind, but she shook her head, her voice steady. "Nobody." The lie burned her throat, and she stepped back, requesting time to decide. Cutter nodded, but his gaze followed her out, heavy with suspicion. Mara's boots crunched on the gravel as she left, her heart pounding, feeling his men's eyes on her back. She'd learned enough to confirm Eli's tip, but the confrontation had tightened the noose around her, pushing her closer to a deadly edge. Suspicion hung thick in Cutter's office as he stood by the window, watching Mara's figure vanish into the dusk. He turned to his men, his voice a low growl. "She's hiding something. Follow her." A wiry soldier nodded, slipping out to trail her, his rifle slung low. Cutter paced, his boots thudding on the creaky floor, and summoned Captain Harlan, a lean man with eyes like steel. "Mara might be with the Lakota," Cutter said, his jaw tight, the gold mine's promise fueling his paranoia. Harlan's lips curled, his voice cold. "I'll crush any threat." Cutter stared out at the darkening fields, the mine's riches so close he could taste them, but Mara's defiance gnawed at him. His scout returned, reporting her safe at home, no signs of trouble, yet Cutter's gut twisted, sensing a lie. He smirked, deciding a raid would break her. "Gather the men. We hit her place tonight," he ordered, his voice sharp, envisioning the flames that would force her secrets out. The room buzzed with activity, soldiers checking rifles, dogs straining at their leashes. Cutter's mind raced, picturing the gold, his empire secured, but Mara's quiet strength lingered, a thorn in his plans. He grabbed his coat, the night's chill fueling his resolve to crush her, unaware of the paper in her pocket that could unravel everything. Flames of torches flickered in the distance as Mara jerked awake, the sound of hooves shaking the cabin's walls. She scrambled to the cellar hatch, her fingers slipping on the iron ring, and hissed down to Tayanita. "Stay silent. They're here." His shadowed nod was her only reply as she slammed the hatch shut, dragging the rug over it. Outside, Cutter's voice roared, "Mara, come out!" Her heart thundered. but she stepped onto the porch, chin high, facing his towering frame and a dozen armed men. "What's this about?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her chest. Cutter sneered, pointing at the mud near her door. "Hiding someone, are you?" She shook her head, insisting she was alone, but soldiers stormed past, kicking over chairs, their boots scuffing the floor near the hatch. One lingered, eyeing the rug, and Mara's breath caught, her hand inching toward a hidden knife. Cutter barked, "Burn it down!" A soldier tossed a torch, flames licking the walls, and Mara lunged for the back door, pulling a secret panel to a crawl space. She and Tayanita scrambled through, the heat searing their backs, and fled into the forest, the crackle of her burning home echoing behind. They crouched in the trees, her hand gripping his, her resolve steeling as the fire consumed her past, pushing her toward a fight she couldn't escape. Branches lashed Mara's face as she and Tayanita stumbled through the dark forest, the distant roar of flames chasing them. Her chest heaved, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks, the image of her burning cabin, Thomas's legacy, searing her mind. Tayanita's hand gripped hers, his wounds slowing him, but his voice cut through her grief. "We'll make them pay." They found a shallow cave, its stone walls icy against their backs, and collapsed, the cold seeping through their clothes. Mara pulled the bloodied paper from her coat, her fingers trembling as she squinted at the name Harlan scrawled beside Cutter's. Tayanita's breath rattled, but he leaned close, whispering, "My people, the Lakota, can help, but they'll need convincing." Her heart sank, fear of rejection battling her need for allies. She nodded, tucking the paper away, her resolve hardening despite the ache of loss. The forest loomed silent, its shadows hiding dangers, but Mara's grief fueled a quiet fire. She helped Tayanita adjust his bandages, her hands steady, refusing to let despair win. The cave's chill wrapped around them, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. But she clung to his promise of justice, her determination to fight growing stronger with each passing moment, pushing her toward a new, uncertain path. Moonlight filtered through the trees as Tayanita led Mara deeper into the forest, his steps uneven but sure, guiding her around hidden routes to avoid Harlan's patrols. His voice, low and steady, spoke of Awinita, the wise Lakota elder whose judgment could sway their fate. Mara's fingers tightened around the paper in her coat, its weight a constant reminder of the risk, her body shivering as they waded through a freezing stream, water soaking her to the knees. She bit back a gasp, fear of being turned away gnawing at her, a settler in a world that distrusted her kind. Tayanita paused, pointing to a faint trail of bent grass, a sign of Lakota scouts, and urged her forward with a nod. Her heart pounded, each step a plea for Awinita to listen. As dawn broke, smoke rose from a cluster of lodges ahead, the Lakota camp coming into view, its quiet strength both daunting and hopeful. Mara's legs trembled, but she straightened, brushing mud from her coat, her resolve steeled by the need to protect Tayanita and expose Cutter's crimes. The forest silence felt like a held breath, waiting for her to prove her worth, her courage, a fragile spark against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Smoke curled from the Lakota camp's fire, as Mara and Tayanita were led through rows of lodges, wary warriors eyeing them, their hands resting on knives. Awinita sat by the flames, her silver hair braided tightly, her sharp eyes locking onto Mara like a hawk. Tayanita stepped forward, his voice hoarse but firm, recounting how Mara saved him, offering the blood-stained paper as proof. Mara's throat tightened, but she spoke, her words trembling yet clear, detailing Cutter's plot and the army's role in burning villages. Awinita's gaze pierced her, and she asked, "Why risk your life for a Lakota?" Mara's chest ached, Thomas's memory rising. "My husband believed in justice, in kindness, no matter who you are." Her voice steadied, fueled by conviction, as she met Awinita's eyes. The elder's face remained unreadable, the fire's crackle filling the silence. and she raised a hand, signaling a council meeting. Mara's pulse raced, fear of rejection clashing with hope, her hands clenched to hide their shaking. Tayanita's nod gave her strength, his trust, a lifeline in the tense air. The warrior's stares weighed heavy, but Mara stood tall, her determination burning brighter, ready to face the council's judgment, knowing her words could forge an alliance or leave them alone against Cutter's wrath. Tension gripped the council lodge as Wakiza, a young warrior with a scarred jaw, leaped to his feet, his voice sharp. "She's a settler! A liar!" Firelight danced on the stern faces of the Lakota elders, their eyes fixed on Mara, who stood at the center, her heart pounding. Wakiza jabbed a finger at her, spitting, "Her kind betrays us always." Tayanita's voice rose, firm despite his wounds, recounting how Mara lost her home to save him, his words heavy with gratitude. Mara's hands shook, but she stepped forward, her voice steady. "I gave him bread, risked everything, because it was right." She held up the paper, pointing to Harlan's signature, her fear swallowed by defiance. Awinita's gaze softened, but she declared a test. "Join our ambush on Cutter's men, prove your heart." Wakiza scoffed, his eyes blazing, but nodded, his reluctance clear. The council murmured, the air thick with doubt, and Mara's stomach twisted, knowing failure could doom them. She met Tayanita's eyes, his nod a silent vow to stand by her. The fire's heat pressed against her, mirroring the pressure within, but she squared her shoulders, accepting the challenge. Her resolve hardened, a quiet strength, rising to meet Wakiza's scorn, ready to fight alongside the Lakota, her fate now tied to their trust and the battle ahead. The council's fire roared as Mara faced the elders, their weathered faces unyielding under the flickering light. She took a breath, her voice clear despite the knot in her chest, and told of the bread she shared, the soldiers who burned her home, each word a plea for trust. She unfolded the paper, holding it high, its military seal glinting as she pointed to Cutter's and Harlan's names, her voice rising with urgency. "They're stealing your lives for gold." An elder leaned forward, his voice gruff. "What do you gain from this?" Mara's eyes stung, but she answered, "Justice, for my husband, for your people." Tayanita stepped beside her, his bandaged form swaying, and added, "She lost everything for me." The room fell silent, the fire's crackle the only sound, as Awinita's gaze weighed her words. The elder nodded, her voice firm. "You'll fight with Tayanita, under his lead." Mara's heart leaped, relief mixing with fear, her hands steady as she tucked the paper away. Wakiza's glare lingered, but the council's approval was a fragile victory. She followed Tayanita out, his quiet strength grounding her, the weight of the ambush looming. The night air bit her skin, but her resolve burned, ready to prove her loyalty, to turn the paper's secrets into a weapon against Cutter, no matter the cost. Shadows cloaked the forest trail as Mara crouched behind a thorny bush, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would betray her. Tayanita's hand signal flashed, and the Lakota warriors tensed, their knives glinting in the moonlight. The rumble of wheels grew closer. Cutter's wagon rolling into view, flanked by 4 soldiers, their rifles slung low. Mara's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the signal stick, waiting for Tayanita's nod. She snapped it, the crack piercing the silence, and the Lakota surged forward, silent as wolves, tackling the soldiers in a blur of steel and fists. Mara darted to the wagon, her hands trembling as she pried open a wooden crate, papers spilling out. Her eyes caught Harlan's signature, a damning link to the gold mine, but Wakiza's knife clattered to the ground, the sound echoing like a gunshot. A soldier spun, firing a warning shot, the bullet splintering a tree above her. Mara stuffed the papers into her coat, her pulse racing as Tayanita shouted, "Run!" The Lakota melted into the trees, soldiers shouting and firing blindly into the dark. Mara's legs burned, branches snagging her clothes, but she kept pace, the stolen documents a lifeline. The forest swallowed their escape, leaving only the soldiers' curses behind, her fear tempered by the weight of their small victory, pushing her to fight on. Flames erupted in the Lakota camp as Harlan's soldiers stormed through, their torches igniting lodges, screams of children piercing the night. Mara's arms cradled a trembling girl, herding elders into the forest, her boots slipping on blood-slicked ground. Tayanita fought at the camp's edge, his knife slashing a soldier's arm, blood spraying across his face as another swung a rifle butt grazing his shoulder. Mara's heart lurched, but she pressed forward, guiding the child to safety behind a boulder. Wakiza roared, his blade cutting down a soldier. But a bayonet caught his side, blood gushing as he collapsed. His face twisted in pain. A young warrior shoved Awinita behind him, taking a bullet to the chest, his body crumpling as she screamed. Awinita's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Retreat!" Mara grabbed the girl's hand, running deeper into the trees, her lungs burning, the crackle of fire and gunfire fading behind. Tayanita stumbled beside her, blood dripping from his arm, while warriors carried Wakiza, his groans haunting the dark. The forest closed around them, hiding their flight, but the cost weighed heavy, blood and ash staining their path. Mara's chest tightened, guilt clawing at her for sparking this attack, yet her grip on the papers tightened, her resolve hardening to make the sacrifice mean something. Guilt choked Mara as she knelt in the damp cave, wrapping cloth around Wakiza's bloodied side, his shallow breaths filling the silence. Tears blurred her vision. The image of the fallen warrior burned into her mind, his death a weight she'd carried from the camp. Wakiza's eyes fluttered open, pain etching his face, but he muttered, "You're brave, but risky." His words stung, doubt lingering in his gaze, deepening her shame. Tayanita sat nearby, his arm bandaged, his voice soft. "Loss is the cost of justice, Mara." Awinita unfolded the stolen papers, her weathered hands steady, and nodded, her voice firm. "Gold drives them, Harlan and Cutter." Mara's throat tightened, the proof in those pages a spark of hope amid her grief. She wiped her eyes, her voice low. "We confront them at the town meeting. Show everyone." Awinita's gaze met hers, approving, and tasked her with preparing a speech. Mara's hands shook, the responsibility daunting, but she nodded, her guilt fueling a need to act. The cave's cold walls pressed in, echoing her fear of failure, but she gripped the papers, her resolve a quiet flame. Tayanita's hand brushed hers, his trust steadying her, pushing her to face the fight ahead, determined to honor the fallen with truth. The cave's dim light flickered as Mara hunched over a scrap of paper, scratching out words for the town meeting, her hand trembling with nerves. Tayanita leaned close, his voice steady, guiding her to emphasize the paper's truth, his bandaged arm a reminder of their cost. Awinita's shadow loomed, her words sharp. "Speak carefully, they'll want your blood." She sent warriors to scout the town, their footsteps fading into the night, a fragile shield for Mara's mission. Mara tucked the papers into her coat, her fingers brushing the blood-stained edges, fear of losing them gnawing at her. Wakiza, propped against the wall, grunted, insisting he'd join despite his wound, his eyes fierce with loyalty. Thoughts of Thomas surged, his belief in justice a quiet strength, and Mara whispered a prayer for courage. She pulled on her coat, its weight heavy with secrets, and stepped into the dawn, the forest chill biting her skin. Her heart raced, the meeting a gamble that could end in chains, but she squared her shoulders, driven by the need to expose Cutter and Harlan. Tayanita's nod followed her, a silent vow to stand by, his trust a lifeline. The path to town stretched before her, each step a defiance of fear, her resolve burning to turn the papers into a weapon, no matter the danger waiting in the crowd. The town hall buzzed with voices as Mara stepped inside, the air thick with sweat and tension, Tayanita and Awinita close behind. Townsfolk packed the benches, their whispers sharp, curious about her bold claims. Cutter strode in, his laugh booming, his confidence a wall as he leaned against a pillar, mocking her presence. Harlan followed, his uniform crisp, his cold eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Mara's knees trembled, but she climbed the platform, her voice shaking as she began, holding up the papers. "Harlan and Cutter burned villages for gold," she said, pointing to their signatures, her words cutting through the murmurs. The crowd stilled, but Cutter's voice sliced in, sharp and cruel. "She's a madwoman, siding with savages." His sneer sparked laughter, and Harlan's glare silenced doubters, his hand resting on his pistol. Mara's heart pounded, fear threatening to choke her, but she pressed on, detailing the mine's cost in blood. A farmer shouted, "Prove it!" and she held the papers higher, her voice rising with defiance. Tayanita's steady presence grounded her, his eyes fierce, but the crowd's jeers grew louder, Cutter's influence tightening like a noose. Mara's hand shook, the confrontation teetering on failure, yet her resolve burned, refusing to yield, knowing this fight was only the beginning. Jeers erupted in the town hall, the crowd's voices a rising tide of scorn as Cutter's mocking laugh drowned Mara's pleas, his influence twisting their doubts into rage. Townsfolk surged forward, shouting, "Liar! Traitor!" their faces contorted, swayed by his lies. Harlan's cold command cut through. "Seize the Lakota criminal!" Soldiers grabbed Tayanita, his bandaged arm twisting as they bound his wrists, his eyes meeting Mara's in silent defiance. She screamed, "He's innocent!" But her voice was lost in the chaos, a rock grazing her cheek, drawing blood. Soldiers shoved her, her dress tearing as she fell to the floor, her hands scraping wood. Awinita's sharp gesture pulled the Lakota back, their knives lowered to avoid a slaughter retreating into the night. Mara scrambled to her feet, but hands dragged her outside, the crowd's taunts echoing as Tayanita was hauled toward the barracks, his fate a noose. Her knees buckled on the cold ground, sobs racking her body, the papers clutched in her fist now useless. The hall's lights faded, leaving her in darkness, her failure a crushing weight. She staggered away, blood trickling down her face, her heart screaming for Tayanita, her defiance battered but unbroken, vowing to fight despite the town's betrayal, her resolve a flickering ember in the ashes of defeat. Cold stone pressed against Mara's back as she curled up in the cave, her sobs echoing off the damp walls, Tayanita's bound figure haunting her. The town's jeers rang in her ears, her naivety a bitter pill. She'd underestimated Cutter's grip. Awinita's footsteps crunched, and she knelt, wrapping Mara in a firm embrace, her voice steady. Failure carves the path to justice. Mara's tears slowed, her hands fumbling for the papers, their ink smudged but legible. She scanned them, her breath catching at a new name. Morton, a banker tied to Cutter and Harlan. Her mind raced, suspicion flaring. Morton could be the puppet master. The cave's chill mirrored her dread, but she wiped her face, her voice hoarse. "I'll save Tayanita." Awinita's nod was grim, her eyes sharp with trust, urging Mara to act. The papers felt heavier, a map to truth, and Mara's heart steadied, guilt giving way to purpose. She stood, her legs shaky, and tucked the papers close, her fear battling a growing resolve. Tayanita's life hung by a thread, and she'd cut it free, no matter the cost. The cave's shadows loomed, but Mara's defiance burned, a vow to turn her failure into a weapon, her mind already plotting a way to reach the barracks, driven by a desperate need to right her wrong. Regret twisted Sarah's gut as she stood outside the town hall, Mara's bloodied face etched in her memory, the crowd's cruelty a mirror of her betrayal. She slipped into an alley, spotting Cutter's smug grin as he boasted to his men, his laughter fueling her shame. Memories of Mara's kindness, shared bread in lean times, surged, and Sarah's hands clenched, her decision made. She'd make amends. She trekked to the cave, her shawl catching on thorns, and fell to her knees before Mara, tears streaming. "I told Cutter about the mud. I'm sorry." Mara's face softened, her voice firm. "Help me save Tayanita." Sarah nodded, her guilt easing, and whispered, "Morton meets Cutter at a warehouse." Mara's eyes sharpened, the name a key to their fight, and she clasped Sarah's hand. Forgiveness, a silent bond. The cave's damp air clung to them, but Sarah's resolve grew, her fear for her son tempered by loyalty. Mara's plan formed, the warehouse a target to expose Morton, and Sarah vowed to guide her, her heart lighter but braced for danger. The night pressed close, but their shared purpose burned, a fragile hope against Cutter's shadow, pushing Sarah to risk everything to undo her mistake. The cave's fire cast flickering shadows as Eli's voice filled the space. His rough sketch of the barracks spread on the dirt, Sarah and Mara leaning in. Sarah traced the guard posts, her finger shaking, detailing Tayanita's cell in the east wing. Eli's eyes hardened, and he pledged a handful of angry settlers, their hatred for Cutter a spark for rebellion. Mara's voice cut through sharp. "We hit the warehouse too! Find Morton's proof!" Awinita's nod came from the shadows, and she sent Wakiza, his side bandaged but his knife ready, along with 3 Lakota warriors. Mara gripped a dagger, Wakiza's quick lessons steadying her hand, her muscles tensing as she practiced a thrust. The group split. Eli's team to the barracks, Mara's to the warehouse, each move a gamble against death. Her heart raced, the weight of Tayanita's life, and the paper's truth pressing down, but she met Sarah's eyes, their shared guilt a bond. The cave's cold seeped into her bones, but Mara's resolve flared, her fear drowned by the need to act. She adjusted her coat, the papers hidden close, and stepped into the night, the warrior's silent steps beside her. The plan was set, a desperate bid to free Tayanita and expose Morton, her courage a blade honed by loss, ready to cut through the darkness. Moonlight barely pierced the barracks perimeter as Eli's group slunk through the shadows, their breaths misting in the cold. A guard's throat gurgled as a Lakota warrior's knife sliced deep, blood pooling on the dirt, his body dragged behind crates. Eli crept forward, finding Tayanita's cell, his face bruised and swollen, ropes biting his wrists. A key stolen from the guard clicked, freeing him, but a shout broke the silence, alarms blaring as soldiers poured out. Rifles cracked, bullets splintering wood, and a Lakota warrior grunted, blood spurting from his shoulder. Tayanita staggered, Eli's arm steadying him as they ducked behind barrels, blades flashing against bayonets. Mara's heart would have stopped if she'd seen, but she was miles away, her own fight looming. The warriors fought fiercely, one slashing a soldier's leg, blood spraying, but another took a bullet, collapsing with a cry. Eli shouted, "Go!" And Tayanita ran, his legs weak, bullets whizzing past. Soldiers chased, their shots wild, tearing through the night. Eli's knife caught a pursuer's arm, slowing them, but the barracks blazed with chaos, blood and smoke thick in the air. Tayanita stumbled into the trees, his breath ragged. Freedom won, but at a cost, his heart heavy with the fallen, his resolve burning to join Mara's fight, the battle far from over. Bullets tore through the night, their sharp cracks echoing as Eli shoved Tayanita into a tangle of bushes, his voice a desperate shout, "Run!" Tayanita stumbled, his bruised body protesting, but Eli spun back, his dagger flashing in the moonlight. He lunged, slicing a soldier's arm, blood spurting as the man screamed, but another raised a rifle, the shot slamming into Eli's chest. He crumpled, blood pooling beneath him, his dagger clattering on the dirt. Tayanita's cry ripped through the air, raw and anguished, his legs twitching to turn back. But a Lakota warrior's iron grip held him, dragging him into the trees. Blood from his wounds mixed with tears on his face, Eli's sacrifice burning in his mind as he ran, branches clawing his skin. The soldiers' laughter rang out, mocking Eli's still form, their pursuit fading as they turned back. Tayanita collapsed in the forest, his chest heaving, the weight of loss crushing him. His fist clenched, nails drawing blood as he swore vengeance, his heart a furnace of grief and rage. The trees loomed silent, hiding his pain. But Eli's death fueled a resolve to fight, to honor the man who gave his life. Pushing Tayanita toward Mara and the battle still raging, his vow, a fire that wouldn't die. Darkness swallowed the warehouse as Mara, Sarah, and Wakiza slipped through a gap in the fence, their breaths shallow to avoid the glow of a guard's torch. Mara's hands shook as she crept to a stack of crates, her fingers prying at a rusty lock, the creak loud in the silence. Papers spilled out, and she scanned them, her heart leaping at Morton's name, his letters confirming he bankrolled the gold mine's bloodshed. Sarah stood watch, her eyes wide, her pulse hammering as a guard's boots crunched nearby. Wakiza crouched by the exit, his dagger ready, his scarred face tense but focused. Mara stuffed the letters into her coat, a surge of triumph battling her fear. The proof, a weapon against Cutter's empire. A twig snapped, and Sarah gasped, her whisper urgent. "Someone's coming!" Mara froze, her hand clutching the crate, but Wakiza signaled calm, his blade glinting as he scanned the shadows. The guard passed, oblivious, and Mara exhaled, her legs trembling but moving, the letters a lifeline she couldn't lose. They edged toward the exit, the warehouse's looming walls pressing in, each step a gamble. The night air hit her face, cold and sharp as they cleared the fence, her heart racing with the victory, but the guard's distant shout warned of danger still lurking, her resolve steeling for the fight ahead. Torchlight flared, flooding the warehouse as Cutter's growl echoed, his massive frame blocking the exit, Harlan and Morton at his side. Mara rose, clutching Morton's letters, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "You're funding murder for gold." Cutter's laugh was sharp, his eyes mocking. "No one believes a traitor." Harlan's pistol gleamed, his order cold. "Take them." Soldiers surged forward, rifles aimed at Mara's head, their boots thudding on the wooden floor. Morton's thin lips curled, his voice icy. "Hand over the letters, or you all die." Wakiza lunged, his dagger slashing a soldier's arm, blood spraying, but a rifle butt cracked his skull, sending him to the ground, blood pooling. Sarah sobbed, her hands shaking, but Mara gripped her arm, whispering, "Stay strong." Soldiers bound their wrists, the ropes biting, and Mara's stomach twisted. The letters still hidden in her coat, her mind racing for a way out. Cutter's smirk loomed, his confidence a wall, but Mara's eyes burned, refusing to break. The warehouse's air grew heavy, the soldiers' laughter grating, but her defiance held, a spark in the dark. She scanned the room, spotting a loose board by the wall, her heart clinging to a desperate plan, her courage a fragile shield against the noose tightening around them. Ropes cut into Mara's wrists as she twisted, her fingers finding a frayed knot, loosening it in the warehouse's dim corner. Wakiza groaned, blood dripping from his head, but his eyes flashed, catching her signal. He surged up, his dagger slicing a guard's throat, blood gushing as the man collapsed, his rifle clattering. Mara yanked Sarah free, her shoulder burning as a bullet grazed her, the pain sharp but ignored. Soldiers shouted, their rifles firing, bullets splintering crates as Mara dove for cover, dragging Sarah into a maze of barrels. Wakiza fought back, his blade catching another soldier's leg, blood pooling, but a bayonet stabbed his arm, forcing a grunt of pain. He roared, kicking a crate to block the soldiers, buying time. Mara's breath came in gasps, her hands shoving Sarah toward a loose board in the wall, the exit to the forest. Bullets whizzed, one clipping her coat, but she pushed through, the letters still safe. Wakiza stumbled, blood streaming, but waved them on, his dagger slashing to hold the line. They burst into the trees, the soldiers' shouts fading, their pursuit close but faltering. Mara's lungs burned, Sarah's sobs echoing, but they kept running, the warehouse's glow shrinking behind. The forest darkness hid them, her heart pounding with a narrow escape, her resolve unbroken. the letters a beacon for the fight still raging. Pine needles crunched under Mara's boots. As she and Sarah reached the forest clearing, Tayanita's shadowed figure emerging, his face streaked with blood and tears. He staggered toward them, his voice breaking. "Eli, he took a bullet for me." Mara's chest tightened, grief hitting like a blow. But she pulled out Morton's letters, her voice firm. Morton's the mastermind, funding the mine. Tayanita's hand clenched his dagger, his eyes blazing. "He'll pay." Sarah's voice trembled, apologizing to Tayanita, her promise to fight steadying her guilt. Mara's mind raced, her voice urgent. "We call a big meeting. Show the town everything." Tayanita nodded, his jaw tight, but warned, "Harlan's men will hunt us." The forest loomed, its silence heavy with danger, but Mara's heart burned, Eli's sacrifice fueling her. She clasped Tayanita's arm, their shared loss a bond, her resolve a fire against the cold. Sarah's eyes met hers, a silent vow to stand together. The letters felt heavier, proof of Morton's crimes, and Mara's plan took shape, a desperate bid to rally the town. The night pressed close, but their purpose held, a fragile hope against the looming threat. Mara led them deeper into the trees, her steps sure, the fight for justice, now a vow etched in blood, driving her toward a reckoning with Harlan and Cutter. The Lakota camp's fire crackled as Mara and Tayanita stumbled in, their clothes torn, faces streaked with dirt and blood. Mara knelt before Awinita, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "We have Morton's letters, proof of the gold mine's murders. We need a big meeting to show the town." Awinita's eyes narrowed, her silver braids glinting, and she warned, "Cutter will twist their minds again." Tayanita leaned forward, his bandaged arm trembling, and said, "These letters name Morton, the real power. Wakiza, propped against a lodge, his side wrapped in bloodied cloth, grunted, 'She's true, Awinita.'" His words, though pained, carried weight, softening the elder's gaze. Awinita nodded, her voice firm. "Warriors will guard the meeting." Mara's chest eased, gratitude flooding her as she clasped Awinita's hand, the camp's unity a growing strength. The fire's warmth couldn't erase her fear, but Tayanita's steady presence anchored her, his trust a shield against doubt. She stood, her heart pounding, the letters heavy in her coat, knowing the meeting could spark a rebellion or end in chains. The camp buzzed with quiet preparation, warriors sharpening knives, and Mara's resolve hardened, a fire fed by their shared purpose, ready to face the town's judgment and Cutter's wrath, her courage a beacon in the gathering storm. Sarah's heart raced as she slipped into the town, Mara's letter hidden under her shawl, the weight of her past betrayal urging her forward. She found a group of settlers in a smoky tavern, their faces hard with anger, and spoke of Eli's sacrifice, her voice breaking. He died fighting Cutter's men. The room erupted, men cursing Cutter, their fists slamming tables, rage boiling over. Sarah unfolded the letter, reading Mara's call to gather at Black Elk Ridge, her words trembling but clear. An old man, his beard gray, stood, vowing to lead others, his eyes fierce with loss. Sarah's breath steadied, her guilt easing as the settlers nodded, their resolve matching hers. She hurried back to the forest, her steps light despite the danger, and found Mara by the cave, her face etched with worry. "They're coming," Sarah said, and Mara's arms wrapped around her, a fierce hug sealing their bond. The night air bit her skin, but Sarah's heart warmed, her redemption a small victory. The forest loomed, hiding threats, but the settlers' anger was a spark Mara could wield. Sarah's hands steadied, ready to stand by her friend, the letter's promise driving her to face the fight, her courage a quiet flame against the fear of Cutter's retaliation. Dawn painted the sky as Mara stood on Black Elk Ridge, the chosen field stretching wide, its grass brittle underfoot. Tayanita hammered stakes, raising a rough canopy, his bandaged arm straining but steady, preparing for hundreds. Wakiza limped along the perimeter, his dagger flashing as he led warriors to check paths, their eyes sharp for Harlan's scouts. Mara paced, muttering her speech, her voice catching at Eli's name, grief a heavy stone in her chest. Sarah moved through the growing crowd, passing out bread, her smile easing tensions between settlers and Lakota, forging fragile ties. Awinita knelt nearby, her hands raised in prayer, her voice low, calling on ancestors for justice. Mara pulled on a clean coat, the letters tucked close, their weight a reminder of the stakes. Her hands shook, the memory of the town hall's jeers haunting her, but she climbed the wooden platform, her jaw set. The field's vastness felt exposed, each gust of wind a threat, but her resolve burned, fueled by the faces gathering below. Tayanita's nod steadied her, his presence a vow of loyalty, and she gripped the platform's edge, ready to speak, her courage a blade against the danger looming in the crowd. The fight for truth now, a heartbeat away. Voices swelled on Black Elk Ridge, settlers and Lakota crowding the field, their murmurs a tense hum under the gray sky. Mara climbed the platform, her heart thumping, the sea of faces blurring as she gripped Morton's letters. Tayanita stood beside her, his dagger at his hip, his eyes scanning for trouble, a silent shield. Wakiza's warriors lined the edges, their knives ready, their scarred faces grim but resolute. Sarah wove through the crowd, urging calm, her voice soft but firm, bridging divides with quiet strength. Awinita sat at the platform's base, her sharp gaze sweeping the field, her presence a steady anchor. The air grew heavy, anticipation crackling, as Mara raised her hand, signaling silence, her breath shallow. She opened her mouth to speak, the letters trembling in her grip, each word a step toward justice or ruin. The crowd hushed, eyes fixed on her, some curious, others hostile, the weight of their judgment pressing down. Her voice wavered but grew, ready to unveil the truth, her fear drowned by a fire kindled by Eli's sacrifice. The field's vastness felt like a battlefield, the wind carrying whispers of doubt. But Mara's resolve held, her heart set on breaking Cutter's lies, the moment of reckoning now hers to seize. Chaos exploded as Cutter's bellow cut through Mara's opening words, his massive frame charging onto Black Elk Ridge, Harlan's soldiers at his heels, rifles gleaming. Mara's voice rose, fierce and unbroken, reading Morton's letters. "They kill for gold!" The crowd roared, settlers shouting, Lakota raising knives as Harlan's pistol cracked, a settler falling, blood pooling on the grass. Tayanita leaped from the platform, his dagger slashing a soldier's chest, blood spraying as another fired, the bullet grazing his thigh. Wakiza's warriors surged, their blades clashing with bayonets, sparks flying, a warrior grunting as a rifle butt cracked his ribs. Mara clutched the letters, her voice thundering over the chaos, naming Morton as the mastermind, her words a rallying cry. Harlan's shout, "Silence her!" sent soldiers forward, but settlers fought back, fists and clubs swinging, blood and sweat mixing in the fray. Tayanita tackled a soldier, his knife sinking deep, but a boot caught his side, pain flashing across his face. Wakiza roared, his dagger slicing a soldier's arm, blood gushing, but another shot grazed his shoulder. Smoke choked the air, screams and gunfire blending, the field a whirlwind of violence. Mara stood firm, her voice a beacon, refusing to falter, her courage a fire against the bloodshed, the battle for truth raging around her, each clash a step toward justice or doom. Bullets whizzed past as Mara leaped from the platform, yanking Sarah behind a sagging tent, a stray shot grazing her arm, blood seeping through her sleeve. Smoke stung her eyes, the field a chaos of screams and clashing steel as Wakiza fought on, his dagger slicing a soldier's throat, blood pooling beneath him. Another blade caught his side, and he staggered, his face pale but fierce, slashing until he collapsed, his breath ragged. Tayanita notched an arrow, his bowstring taut, and fired. the shaft piercing Morton's shoulder, his scream piercing the din as he fell, clutching his wound. Settlers roared, wielding sticks and stones, smashing soldiers' knees, blood and dirt mixing underfoot. Harlan's men faltered, their rifles dropping as they fled, leaving fallen comrades in the grass. Mara sprinted to Morton, wrenching the letters from his grasp, and held them high, her voice a clarion over the fray. "This is their crime!" The crowd's cheers shook the ridge. Settlers and Lakota united, their fists raised, but the air reeked of blood, the cost of battle heavy. Tayanita limped to her, his thigh bleeding, and gripped her shoulder, his eyes fierce with pride. Sarah sobbed, clinging to Mara, the tense shadow hiding their trembling forms. The fight raged on, but Mara's heart burned, the letters a beacon of truth, her resolve unyielding despite the carnage, each step a defiance of the slaughter around her. Victory surged through the blood-stained field as settlers and Lakota overwhelmed the last of Harlan's soldiers, ropes binding their wrists, their rifles scattered in the dirt. Cutter bolted, his face ashen, but a settler's club tripped him. His massive frame crashing, settlers pinning him as he cursed, his power broken. Mara stood tall, her voice steady, reading Morton's letters again, each word a hammer. They burned villages, killed for gold. The crowd's roar was deafening, settlers shouting for justice, Lakota warriors raising their knives, their faces carved with resolve. Hooves thundered as regular army troops arrived, their captain's eyes narrowing at Harlan's uniform. "You're under arrest, traitor!" he barked, soldiers cuffing Harlan, his cold facade crumbling. Morton, blood soaking his coat, was dragged to a wagon, his sneer gone, his empire shattered. Cutter knelt, head bowed, the crowd's jeers stripping his pride, his name now a curse. Mara's legs shook, but Tayanita's arms steadied her, their tear-streaked faces meeting, Eli's absence a shared ache. She clutched the letters, her voice breaking. "This is for Eli." The ridge fell silent, the crowd's anger softening to grief, their unity a fragile triumph. Mara's heart swelled, the victory bittersweet, her resolve tempered by loss, but the truth had prevailed. A spark of hope kindled in the blood and dust, driving her toward a new fight for peace. The sun rose over Black Elk Ridge, its light soft on the scars of battle, as Mara walked through the budding community of Wungspe Wahang, lodges and cabins rising side by side. Morton and Harlan faced trials, their confessions damning, while Cutter, stripped of power, lived in shame, scorned by all. Mara gathered children around a fire, her hands kneading dough, teaching them to bake bread, its warm scent a symbol of sharing, their laughter a balm to her grief. A stone marker stood for Eli, etched with his name, honored yearly in a festival where settlers and Lakota danced together, their voices mingling under the stars. Mara and Tayanita stood watch, not with weapons but with open hearts, guiding Wungspe Wahang with compassion, their bond a testament to survival. Distant travelers came, drawn by tales of unity, learning to live as one, Mara's legacy spreading like ripples. She knelt by the marker, her fingers tracing Eli's name, tears falling but her smile steady, Thomas's memory woven into the land she'd fought for. Tayanita joined her, his hand gentle on her shoulder, their silence heavy with pride. The field bloomed, a quiet promise of peace. Each loaf shared a defiance of greed. Mara's heart, once hollow, brimmed with purpose. The bread she'd given Tayanita now a spark that toppled injustice, forging a community where kindness prevailed, a living proof that one act could change the world.